That's kind of loud. All right. Okay, Genesis chapter 33. Slowly making it through the book of Genesis. Today, our goal is to get through 2 chapters. It would be incredible, wouldn't it? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Gary. Yeah, praise the Lord. I missed you guys, but yeah, praise the Lord for Gary and the study he brought. And so, because we had a week off, let's just remember a little bit what's going on in Genesis. We're looking at the story of Jacob. And Jacob is a very important person. He's one of the patriarchs, right? He's got this promise that was passed down from Abraham to Isaac and then to him. And he is taking that promise of a blessing not only for the nation of Israel, which comes from his name, but that will eventually bring the Messiah into the world. And so this is a huge blessing, but a huge responsibility, as he's the one who is walking us towards Jesus coming. And that will be important to remember as we get into this story. We're going to, hopefully we'll move a little faster and we'll get through 2 chapters, because they kind of, I like the balance that they give if we get through both, because each of them kind of has a different message, but both of them are important. And I hope that it will be good for us to see. So Jacob has promises of God. His nature, by nature, Jacob, even his name means the manipulator, right? That's who he is. That's what his life has been. He has been doing whatever he can do to get himself ahead, take his brother's birthright, take his brother's blessing, take from his uncle, like whatever he has to do to get ahead, he'll do it. And so because of that, he had broken relationships. His brother wanted to kill him, and so he left there, and then he went to his uncle's house, to Laban's house, and he was there for 20 years, but then his uncle wanted to kill him, and so he left there and snuck away, and they departed from each other, basically saying, don't come back to this side or I'll kill you, right? And we saw that last time, or a couple weeks ago. And then we saw, in our last study in Genesis, we saw how he left Jacob left Laban in chapter 31, and they had that conflict. And then as soon as he leaves there with a promise of God to go back to where he came from, back to the promised land, and then he finds out Esau is coming to meet him, right? And so Esau is the brother that wants to kill him. And he finds out that Esau is not only coming, but he's coming with 400 armed men to see him. And so that would be very intimidating for Jacob. And so in that place, he put all his family, he sent all these gifts to Esau so that he would find the gifts first, and then he put his family out there, the least favorite to the favorite, right? And we saw that. And then he goes over the river, and he stays on the other side by himself. And in that place where he's put everybody else in front of him, then he wrestles with God, right? And we saw that last time, where he wrestles with God, and it says that he prevailed. And how did he prevail when he wrestled with God? Do you remember how he prevailed? He gave up. He prevailed by submission. The way to prevail when you wrestle with God is by submitting to God. It's okay to wrestle with God, as long as you submit to God in the end. That's the way to prevail in your wrestling with him. And so Jacob did that, and then God changed his name, and his name is now Israel. He asked him what his name was. He had to confess that he's Jacob, and then God said, okay, yes, but now you'll be Israel, which means governed by God. right? You'll no longer be the manipulator. You'll be governed by God. And so what a great story that was. And then now chapter 33, we're just coming off of him wrestling with God, and Esau is still coming. I think this is interesting because he's had this mountaintop experience with God where God promises to bless him. He changes his name, and he's with him, and he was face to face with God, and he prevailed. And what a mountaintop experience that would be. But then day comes, right? He wrestled all night, has this experience with God, and then day comes, and guess what? Your problems are still there, right? You wake up the next, like God has met with you and God has spoken with you and you're encouraged and you're excited. And then you wake up to the fact that, oh yeah, I still have problems in life, right? And so that's our reality. That's the world we live in. We're not going to, just because we're following Jesus doesn't mean that our problems disappear. It means that we have Jesus with us in our problems. And so now Esau is still coming with 400 men. And so let's look at what happens here in chapter 33. In verses 1 and 2, it says, "Now Jacob lifted his eyes and looked, and there Esau was coming, and with him were 400 men." Exciting. And so he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two maidservants, and he put the maidservants and their children in front, and Leah and her children behind, and Rachel and Joseph last. So the same thing he had done before, where he's separated by family, he does it again. This is frustrating. Jacob has this moment with God where he wrestles with God. He recognizes his need. He recognizes his failures. God meets with him, encourages him, and then he goes back to old Jacob. And this is the struggle that we have. We can have an experience with God, but overcoming the flesh is not that easy. And it will be a battle, and we might not have victory every time. And so he's learning to not be Jacob and to be Israel. He's learning to be governed by God. But that learning process is not so easy. And so here, he still has Jacob in him. Even though he has Israel in him, he also has Jacob in him. And so he goes back to what he had done before. He divides up the family. He puts his favorite part of the family last so that they're the most likely to not die. And so Rachel and Joseph, they're the last ones. We talked about this last time, and I don't want to get really too much into it, but I'm sure this has an effect on family relationships. It has an effect on identity issues. It has an effect on their trust in their father's love and care, right? And so all of those things are going to come out in future chapters, and we're going to see the consequences of these types of decisions. Joseph is going to be sold as a slave, almost killed, and then sold as a slave. And I'm sure moments like this don't help the situation for Joseph, right? Where he's the preferred one, he's the loved one, he's the cared for one, and everyone else is, well, you're expendable. We'll just put you in the front. If anybody has to die, we'll let you die first. How does that feel? Yeah, so, I mean, I think if there's something that we can learn from this, it's just because somebody takes the name of God, he's called governed by God, it doesn't mean that he'll represent God. He's one of the patriarchs, and we would hope that he would represent God. But unfortunately, he doesn't always do it. And it's just like Christians don't always do it well. But what we know about Jesus is Jesus doesn't do this with us. Jesus doesn't play favorites. He doesn't, well, this is my preferred son, right? With Jesus, we're all loved equally by him. He loves us so much that he would die for us. There is no preference. There are differences in giftings. There's difference in calling. There's differences in the trials and tribulations that each of us will go through. And so that will look different, but the amount of love that God has for you and how much he cares for you, it doesn't change. He loves you as much as he could possibly love you. And so we see that in his children, but not in Jesus. Jesus loves us all the same. There's no preference one to another. So then verse 3 it says, then he crossed over before them and bowed himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brothers. So this is different than what we had seen before. I do want to give him credit here because there is growth in his life. Last time we saw him put all his family first. He divided them up and then he sent them out to the front, the presents, the animals, and then the family that he doesn't like as much and the family he does like, and right? And he puts these separations so that they might get away. And then he went to the other side of the river to save himself. And then he wrestles with God, right? I will give Jacob credit because even though he does that with his kids, which is terrible, at least he goes to the front now. This is at least a step forward where he didn't hide behind all of his family. At least he goes first and says, I'll go meet with him before anybody else. So there is some growth. He's not perfect. He's far from perfect. But he goes out first and he meets with his brother and he lets his family come behind him, which I think we got to give him credit where we can find it, right? If you can find opportunity to see good in Jacob, we got to take advantage. So he goes first and he bows himself down to the ground and I like this, that he bows himself down to the ground and he bows himself 7 times. And we know seven is considered the number of completion, right? So he humbles himself to the point of completion. He fully humbles himself, right? Which is a good example, again, that we see in Jacob here. As he goes out, he's not putting everyone else out before him. He goes and he humbles himself and he gets before. He's the one who wronged Esau. And he deserves to be hated for what he did, right? And so he has to go deal with those consequences. He needs to go first and he needs to humble himself. That's what he should do. That's the Christian thing. That's the responsible thing to do. And he does that. So I'm glad that he shows a little bit of maturing here and he humbles himself. He bows to the ground and he goes to meet Esau before anybody else comes out. And then verse 4, it says, Esau ran to meet him. He's going to embrace him and he's going to fall on his neck and kiss him and they're going to weep together. That's what happens. But I wonder in this moment where he starts running, Esau's coming and he's afraid, like there's 400 people. He's afraid for his life. And then Esau starts running towards him. Like, that's scary. Like, did he start running away at first? What was his reaction? But he runs to him and he embraces him, and there's this beautiful scene where he falls on his neck, he kisses him, and it's a great reunion, and it's just awesome to see the change in Esau, that he is forgiving. The last time Esau was with Jacob, he said that he wanted to kill him. He wanted to kill his own brother because of what he did to him. And I don't know what happened in this process, because to me, and the Bible doesn't tell us this is my interpretation, but to me, if Esau came with 400 armed men, he didn't do that to come and hug him. That's my thought, right? If he came with 400 armed men, he probably had something in mind that he was going to do. And we saw when Jacob met with Laban, that Laban was going to do him harm, and then God met Laban that night before he met Jacob, and God told him, don't do anything against Jacob. And God had protected him. And I wonder if God was working in Esau's heart on this trip as he's going to meet him. I wonder if God had protected him, if God had worked in him. And remember also, Jacob is sending these gifts, and maybe those gifts had softened his heart. Maybe he realized, oh, my brother's different now. He's not taking for himself, he's willing to give. He's willing to this is his apology, right? And so maybe that softened his heart, but I think God is working behind the scenes, and Esau now has softened his heart, and they have this great reunion where they weep together and they hug and, just happy to be together. And then he meets the family. Verse 5, it says he lifted his eyes and saw the women and the children and said, who are these who are with you? And he said, the children whom God has graciously given to your servant. Then the maidservants came near, and they and their children bowed down, and Leah also came near with her children, and they bowed down, and afterward Joseph and Rachel came near, and they bowed down. And so the whole family comes little by little because they're all separated, right, by this area. So first comes the maidservants and their kids, and then the Leah and hers, and Rachel comes, and And they all meet Esau for the first time, and this is their first meeting together. He's never met Jacob's own brother, and now they have this meeting together, and it's a great time for the family to finally meet Esau in a beautiful reunion. Could have been terrible, but because God is working, they all are able to just have a happy reunion. Verse 8 says, Then Esau said, What do you mean by all this company which I met? And he said, These are to find favor in the sight of my Lord. Remember in chapter 32, he had sent out all these gifts. Let me see. In verse 13 of chapter 32, he gives these presents to Esau, his brother. He says 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milk camels and their colts, 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys, 10 foals. And so he sends all these things, and he sends them out to be a gift to him so that he'll receive that and know that Jacob's giving him a gift. I have a friend who calculated this, and it was not he just went on Google and looked at the price of each of these animals and took the lowest he could find of each of these animals and just wrote up the value of it, and he came to about $350,000 worth of gifts if it was just in today's, and he did the very lowest that he could find according to Google. So not very scientific at all, but just imagine 350, like he's not giving a small gift. This is $350,000 worth of gift that he's giving to his brother. So this is not a small thing that he's sending out. This is huge. This is wealth that he's sending to his brother. And so he sends that out first as an apology by actions. And I think that's a good example also. Jacob is growing in some things. His apology is not just in words, but it's in action. Remember what Jacob had done to Esau was take the blessing from him. And now he's saying, I took from you, now I want to give to you. I want to give to you. I've made a mistake. I've done these things to you. I want to give back to you. And he's taking responsibility. He's being willing to give, and I think that shows a lot that he's changing his character, his way of dealing with problems. Before it was all, what can I get? And so he sent out these things so that he might find favor. It might be a little bit of manipulation, right? What can I get? I want to get what I can get. And so he doesn't want to be killed, so he sends the gift. So probably a little bit of manipulation there too, but he's willing to give of what is his. And so he said that I might find favor in your sight. And then verse 9, it says, But Esau said, I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself. I like this too with Esau because Jacob had taken the blessing from Esau, that spiritual blessing, right? The spiritual part where he is receiving the promise of God to bring the nation and the Messiah and all those things that's going to come through Jacob, right? He took that spiritual blessing, which was really promised to him before their birth, but Esau thought that it should belong to him. And so Jacob had taken that by manipulation, but Esau has still been taken care of by God. He says, I have enough. And I like that point, that even though someone had wronged him, someone had stolen from him, someone had taken advantage of him, God still takes care of Esau. God knows the needs, and he takes care of him in his needs. And I like seeing that about Esau. The word here where he says, I have enough. He says, the word enough here is the word I have much, or I have an abundance. I have much. I'm good. I'm not needing anything. I have everything that I need. And I think he's found something that's very important, that he's satisfied with what he has. He realizes what I have is much. It's enough. I don't need anything. It's hard to find people that have come to that place. I've never been in a place where I have said I have enough. I mean, in my life, I always feel like if I had a little more, it would be enough, right? And no matter how much you have, you always think, well, if I just had a little more, it would be enough. How great it is for Esau to be in this place and say, you know what what I have is enough. I'm blessed by God. I'm satisfied. I'm okay. God's taking care of me, and it's enough. And the Bible says that godliness with contentment is great gain. When you can be content with what you have and say, I have enough. This is good. And he has that. That's a good example for us. Interesting, though, let me jump ahead. We'll come back to verse 10. But verse 11, he's going to say, Jacob is going to say, verse 11. He says, please take my blessing that is brought to you because God has dealt graciously with me and because I have enough. So Jacob is going to say the same thing, I have enough, but what's interesting is we lose it in the translation. Jacob uses a different word for enough. The word that Esau uses is the word much or abundant. I have much. I've been blessed. I'm good. I have everything I need. I have more than enough. I'm fine. I don't need what you're giving me. I'm okay. But then Jacob uses a word that doesn't mean abundance or much. It literally means all. He says, not only do I have enough, I have everything. Not only do I have the blessing, but I have everything. He just brought his family. He has the promises of God. He has the family that God's blessed him with. He has flocks and herds that he can spare and give away for free. He says, not only do I have enough, I have everything. Man, what a great attitude. Jacob is the guy who up until this point has always felt like I never have enough. How can I get more? What can I take from Esau? What can I take from my dad? What can I take from Laban? What can I take from anybody to get gain for myself? Jacob has never been the guy to think that he has enough. And then he has this experience with God, and all of a sudden he realizes, man, I have more than enough. I have everything. When he was in that place where he might lose everything, he recognized what he actually had. When he realized, man, my brother's going to come and he's going to kill me. And he realizes, man, I have all of this financial blessing. I have all of my family. My brother has come. He's had grace on me. I had the blessing of God, the promises of God. He showed up and he spoke to me. What else can I ask for? I have everything. And someone that God has given us every spiritual blessing. May we recognize the blessings of God and be aware of them. Instead of always thinking, if I just had a little more, if I just had a little more, we'll never be satisfied, we'll never be content. But Jacob realized he had everything he needed. Let's go back to verse 10. He says, so Esau in verse 9 had said, I have enough. You keep all these presents that you've sent. I don't need them. In verse 10, Jacob said, no, please, if I have now found favor in your sight, then receive my present from my hand, inasmuch as I have seen your face as though I had seen the face of God, and you are pleased with me. So Jacob now is insisting, because this is his apology. His apology is giving these gifts. And this is his way of saying sorry. And culturally, he would have to make recompense for his wrongdoing. And so culturally for them, this doesn't really apply so much to us, but culturally for them, if Esau rejects this gift, he's rejecting the apology. And he's saying, you know what, I don't want it, because then he'll be saying, I don't want your apology. And so him rejecting it, first he gives, I think that Esau isn't trying to reject it. I think what Esau's trying to do is basically saying, I know who you are, Jacob. I know you take everything for yourself. I'm going to give you the chance to take that back. I'm going to give you the chance to say, no, you don't, if you don't really want to give this, you don't have to give it. I'm giving you the opportunity to take it back if that's not really what you want to do. But Jacob says, no, I really do want to do this. Even though you're giving me the chance to not, I really do. This comes from my heart. This is something I want to give to you. I have to give you this apology, and I want you to accept it. And so it's a great picture of Jacob giving not only because he has to, but giving from the heart now. He was given the opportunity. If you don't want to give it, don't give it. But he says, no, I have to give it. I have to make this right. I have wronged you. Please let me make it right. And so then Esau will accept it. But this is such a great phrase here where he says, inasmuch as I have seen your face as though I had seen the face of God. He sees the face of Esau when Esau comes running to him and he weeps over him. The picture that's given here, when he runs to him, he weeps over him and he kisses them. Does that remind you of a New Testament story?
Yes, definitely.
Isn't there a story that's exactly like that with the prodigal son, right? Who went away, and then when he comes back, the father runs out to him, even though all that he did against his father, and the father runs to him and he kisses him and he blesses him and throws a party for him. Esau here is being a picture of Jesus in his forgiveness. In his forgiveness, he's representing what Jesus would do. And that's the heart of Jesus, is forgiveness. The heart of God toward us is he's given us forgiveness of everything we've ever done. And so he expects us to have forgiveness for others. And so that's a lesson we see here. Esau has the face of God. How does he have the face of God? He says, I saw in you the face of God and you were pleased with me. When he saw that Esau was wronged, and yet he had forgiveness and he was still pleased with Jacob, he says, when I saw that, I saw God in you. And that represents God to people. When people wrong us and we can still love them with the love of Jesus, you're showing the face of God. People will see God in you when you do that. Now, I give that side of the story, but I really want to get into chapter 34 because we're going to see another side of that story. Forgiveness has to be part of the life of the Christian. Because we've been forgiven much, we have to forgive much. But also we have to recognize that there's a place for justice. And we'll get into that in chapter 34. So, but let's keep going here. We'll try to speed up a little bit because we're going way too slow. So he says he saw the face of God, and then he said, please take my blessing that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough, which we saw. I have everything, and so he urged him, and he took it. So now he insists on him taking this gift. It wasn't just for show. He says, no, you have to take it. And Esau accepts. He says, okay, if this is what you really want to do, I'll receive it. And so it's kind of accepting the apology that was given by Jacob. And so now all of those things. I like this because he gives his apology by actions, and then they're able to just say, okay, now let's go back to where we were. Let's start this over. We can have a relationship again. Now, Jacob still has Jacob in him, right? So it's not going to be that simple. But let's rejoice over what happened. And then we'll get into the next section here. So verse 12, it says, then Esau said, let us take our journey and let us go, and I will go before you. But Jacob said to him, my Lord knows that the children are weak, and the flocks and herds which are nursing are with me. And if the men should drive them hard, one day all the flocks will die. Please let my Lord go ahead before his servant, and I will lead on slowly at a pace which the livestock that go before me and the children are able to endure, until I come to my Lord in Seir. And Esau said, let me leave with you some of the people who are with me. But he said, what need is there? Let me find favor in the sight of my Lord. So Jacob says, or Esau says, let's go back to Seir, and I'll go with you. We'll walk together. And Jacob says, no. I have all these kids. You guys are a group of soldiers. You guys go ahead. We'll come after you. I don't want to make it hard for my kids and the flock. So sounds good, right? Sounds reasonable. Here's the problem. He says, we're going to Seir. Jacob says, I don't need you to leave any men with me. I don't need you to go with me. You just go on ahead. We'll come after you. We'll meet you in Seir. Now can you show the picture here, the map? Let me show you the map, if you can see it. So down at the bottom, can you see where Hebron and Beersheba are? That's the area of the promised land on the left there at the bottom, where the arrows start on the bottom left. And Jacob had gone all the way up to the very top in Haran, and where he met Laban. And so he travels all the way up to the very top right corner to Haran. And then he leaves Haran and he goes back down. And down here, if you can see can you see that number 5? Where Peniel, that's where he wrestled with God. And then he meets with Esau here in that area, right there in the middle, yeah, you can see that, right? So on the right side in the middle, that's where he meets with Esau, and they have this conversation, and he says, okay, you go on and I'll come after you, okay? If you look to the very bottom right corner, it says Seir, all the way down in the bottom right. So that's where Esau is headed. And Jacob says, you go on ahead to Seir, and I'll follow you. But here's the problem. Jacob is going to go to the left there, to Sukkoth, and then he's going to go to Shechem, farther left. He's heading west, and even a little bit north. From Peniel, he goes northwest. He's heading in the opposite way. When he leaves, he goes the opposite way of where Esau's going. So this is why I want to point that out, because he sounds like, oh yeah, everything's good, we're friends. I'll just follow you down. You go first. I'm coming after you. We'll meet back up in Seir. He doesn't meet him in Seir. He's not going to Seir. He never planned to go to Seir. He just wants to get rid of the problem. Like, hey, everything's solved. You go ahead and move on. I'm going to go do my thing. God had told him to go back to the promised land, to where he had come from. So he's going the way that God told him, kind of, in a roundabout way. He goes a little bit north, and then he goes over, and then he goes down. But kind of in the direction that God told him. Why wasn't he honest with his brother? Why didn't he just say, hey, God told me to go back to the promised land. God told me to go back to where we came from. I'm going to go that way. You go head on. We'll meet up later. He doesn't tell him that. He's still got this thing of manipulation. I think he's still afraid of his brother, so he just says, yeah, I'll follow you. He just wants to get out of the problem. And so there's still a little bit of Jacob in there where he's like, I want to do what I want to do. I'm going to do what works out for me, and you go ahead on. And so Esau leaves and goes to Seir, and Jacob, it says, verse 17, journeyed to Sukkoth, which is there to the left, to the west. And so Esau's going south, and Jacob goes west. And notice it says, Jacob journeyed to Sukkoth, and look at it, it says he built a house for himself. And he made booths for his livestock, and therefore the name of the place is called Sukkoth, which means booths. He goes to this place that isn't at all what he told his brother. Like, why are you still doing this? Why are you still manipulating and lying? You don't even need to. You have the promise of God. You just made things right. Like, this is a new start. But he's got this so ingrained in him. The process of Jacob becoming Israel, he had a moment where he recognized it, and then he's going to be battling it until it's brought to completion. It's not, there's this, he's struggling to become. There's a process of transformation that's happening. And so when you see that in your own life where you're like, oh, I did really good, and you get on this high of like, man, I had a really good week, and I had this time where I was humble, and I read my Bible, and I talked to this person about Jesus. What a great week. And then you go to the next week and you really struggle all week. Guess what? That's part of our transformation process. Don't let it stop you from having another good week the next week. Get back right. Come back to the Lord. Get right with him and continue on. This is the struggle that we have. So he builds a house for himself. They were called to be a nomadic people. This wasn't their home yet. God was going to give it to them as their home, and he's not even in the promised land yet, and he builds a house. He's was supposed to go. So now he's not doing what he said to Esau, but he's also not doing what God told him to do. He stops in the middle and builds a house. He's like, well, I don't want to fully follow Esau, but I don't want to fully follow God either. And he just stays in the middle and builds a house for himself. Like, come on, guy, what are you doing? So anyways, he builds a house, and then going on verse 18, it says, Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem. So now he leaves Sukkoth, and he goes a little farther over to Shechem, which is actually in the land of Canaan. It says in verse 18, and when he came from Padan Aram, and he pitched his tent before the city. So now he actually gets into the promised land, but this is that north part. If you see the number 8 on there, it says Shechem underneath that, and that's the north part of Canaan, but it's not where he's ultimately supposed to go. He's supposed to go south to where he came from. He's going to go through Bethel, and he's going to go to ultimately to Hebron, where his family comes from. But again, he stops. He gets into the land of Canaan, and he thinks, well, I obeyed partially, so let me stop here. And it says in verse 19 that he bought a parcel of land and he pitched his tent. And it says he had pitched his tent from the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. So he bought the land for 100 pieces of money. He puts his tent there. He's in this land of these pagans from Canaan, and he just buys a piece of this land and stops there. Like, this isn't what God called you to. God told you what to do. He told you where to go, and here you stop in the middle because he can probably justify it like, well, I'm back in Canaan, so that counts, right? That's got to count for something. And sometimes we have that partial obedience with the Lord where we're like, well, I did this. Yeah, but you didn't fully obey. You obeyed for a season, and then you stopped obeying. You had a great mountaintop experience, and God worked, and it was emotional, and it was awesome, and you took a few steps, but then you just stopped. One of the lessons that we're going to see that's so important in these chapters is the importance of abiding in Jesus. The mountaintop experience, that emotional experience with God, that's awesome, and those things are great, and praise the Lord for those times, but that's not our Christian life. We need to abide every day, and it's the decisions we make day by day. And so he stops here, and then he makes this altar, and he calls it El Elohi Israel, which means God, the God of Israel. Seems good. I mean, it's good to build an altar, and he calls the place the God of Israel, saying this is his God, right? Not just the God of his fathers. That's a good thing to do. But he's doing a religious ceremony when he's in disobedience. And I think this is another danger for us. Sometimes when we're in disobedience, we can do other things to make it feel like, well, I'm not doing that bad. You know God has spoken to you. You know God has called you to do something. You know God has given you direction. You don't want to really obey that direction, so you just do other religious things to make it feel like you're doing good, right? And it's just a mask for the disobedience that you've done. And I think here he's just trying to soften the, I didn't obey, but look, I'm making altars to God. Yeah, but you're in disobedience. And God desires obedience more than sacrifice. And so instead of disobeying and making an altar, why don't you just obey God and do what you're supposed to do? And go where he's telling you to go. Follow what he's told you to do. So he makes an altar, but I don't know that it's necessarily from the heart. So we're going to see now, I'm going to go quickly through chapter 34 and just make a few. It's the worst chapter. Well, chapter 38 competes with it. But there's two really bad chapters in Genesis. This is one of them. So we'll try to go as fast as we can through it and see if we can get through and just make a few points. So chapter 34, it says, Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the daughters of the land. So remember, they're in the land of Canaan. They are among pagan people. He's bought a piece of land, but he's among these pagans in the land of Canaan who they're called to be separate from. And now the daughter Dinah is going out with the daughters of the land. And it's important to know that culturally, this wouldn't be very acceptable. This wouldn't be acceptable at all, actually. There would, for a woman to be able to go out, she would have to have a chaperone. She would have to have the protection of somebody in the family, a brother or a father, because she would be in danger, and especially in a pagan land that they don't know, and there's all these crazy things that they worship, and she doesn't know what she's getting into. And so she goes with the daughters of the land. She's letting the culture of that place dictate what she wants to do. And man, there's a lot of application in that, right? When we let the culture that we're in dictate how we act, we need to let the Word of God, we need to have a biblical worldview so that we don't let the culture corrupt the morality that God has for us. And so she goes out with the daughters of the land, and it says in verse 2, when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, prince of the country. So this guy is super important. He's thinks he can do whatever he wants in this place. He's the prince. And so it says he saw her, and he took her, and he lay with her, and he violated her. So Obviously, this would mean sex outside of marriage, which would ruin her for marriage, right? Nobody would want to marry her if she's not a virgin. And so that's a huge violation in itself, but most commentators believe that this was probably rape. This guy being a prince and her being out with no chaperone, she's kind of saying she's available, and him thinking he can do whatever he wants, he just thinks he can take her. And so it is interesting. Some people don't think that it was rape because of the way that he treats her after. He definitely falls in love with her. What he thinks is love anyways. But he's willing to do a lot for her. And so it's a really interesting story, and whatever happens, whether it's rape or just that he just decides, I just want to, go have sex with you outside of marriage, and I don't care about what this means for the rest of your life. Like, he's ruining the rest of her life by doing this, whether it's rape or not. She won't have a suitor that wants to marry her after this. And so he's ruining her life by doing it, and so it is a violation either way. But by the reaction of the brothers, we'll see. We'll get to that. Verse 3, it says, his soul was strongly attracted to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the young woman. So he says he's in love with her. He's attracted to her. And it says he spoke kindly to the young woman. So he's not just trying to take advantage of her. He's speaking kindly to her. He cares about her. He desires more than just this one encounter. He wants more than that. So he speaks kindly to her, and verse 4, it says, so Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, get me this young woman as a wife. So him being entitled, he thinks I can have whoever I want, and he doesn't know about Israel. I don't know how long they had been here, but he doesn't know that Israel is called to be separate from the people. They're called to not intermarry with the people of the land. God had specifically told them that, and Jacob knows that, and apparently he hasn't passed it on well to his kids, but this is forbidden for them. And so he just thinks, well, I want this woman as a wife. And he tells his dad, the king, go and get her for me as a wife. Right? He's just this entitled guy that thinks he can have whatever he wants. And so verse 5, it says, Jacob heard that he had defiled Dinah, his daughter, and now his sons were with his livestock in the field. And so Jacob held his peace until they came. And then Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him. So Jacob hears about it first, and Jacob doesn't do anything. He holds his peace. I don't know if he's waiting for his son's reactions. I don't know if he's waiting for them to do something, but he just doesn't do anything. He doesn't have a reaction. And I think this is the balance that I wanted to make sure that we see, because we saw in the last chapter how incredible forgiveness is, and forgiveness for the Christian is something that we have to do. We have to have forgiveness. On the other side, justice is something that is built into us by the nature of God, because we can't live in a society without justice, without consequences to people doing wrong, right? Society doesn't work without that. And so there is this need inside of us for us to make things right. When something has happened that is an injustice, we need to make it right. And so we see forgiveness as important, but that doesn't come at the expense of justice, because without justice, then chaos reigns, right? And that's also not good. And so we see here this terrible thing happen. Dinah was violated. Jacob hears about it and does nothing, and it leaves this void. It leaves this void to now the sons don't know what they're supposed to do, because the dad didn't deal with it, and there's this problem that's happened, and Jacob has remained silent, and something needs to happen. And so that brings more chaos, because justice wasn't brought. More chaos comes, which is worse. Instead of it being dealt with in a just and a righteous way, now it's going to be dealt with in vengeance. And vengeance is so much worse than justice, right? If justice had been brought, there wouldn't have been the need for vengeance. So It says in verse 7, the sons of Jacob came in from the field, and they heard it, and the men were grieved and very angry, because he had done a disgraceful thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, a thing which ought not to be done. And so the sons have a good reaction, right? The reaction that they have here is the right reaction. They're grieved and they're angry. They realize that this is not acceptable, this is not good, and it needs to be dealt with. Right? That should have been Jacob's response, but he didn't have that response. And so the sons have that response. And so they have this void that's been left, and this need to do something. And so they're going to deal with it by vengeance instead of allowing justice to take place. So going on verse 8, it says, but Hamor spoke with them, saying, the soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him as a wife, and make marriages with us. Give us your daughters, or give your daughters to us, and take our daughters for yourselves. And so you shall dwell with us, and the land shall be before you, and dwell and trade in it, and acquire possessions for yourselves in it. And then Shechem said to her father and to her brothers, let me find favor in your eyes, and whatever you say to me, I will give. And so in a way, he's trying to make it right, and he's trying to marry her, and he's trying to, he said, I'll pay whatever dowry, whatever the cost is, I'll pay it. And so there's something honorable about him in this aspect, although he did do wrong, and he deserves the punishment for it. He's trying to make it right by marrying her and paying the cost for her, and not taking advantage of the situation. And so, there's somewhat of an honorable response afterward. And he says, ask me ever so much dowry and gift, and I will give according to what you say to me, but give me the young woman as a wife. So he's desperate to marry this girl. He wants to be with her. He doesn't want it to just be this one time, but he wants to have her as a wife, and he wants to make it right, and he wants to pay the dowry that's due, but he also doesn't want to confess what he did as wrong, right? And so there's this disconnect where, yeah, he's trying to make it right, but also you did wrong, right? This isn't acceptable. And so the brothers are justified in being angry and being grieved by the situation. And so now something has to happen. But Jacob didn't deal with it, and so it leaves this void. And then verse 13 it says, but the sons of Jacob answered Shechem and Hamor his father, and spoke deceitfully, because he had defiled Dinah their sister. So now the brothers, because Jacob didn't deal with it, the brothers decide, well, we'll deal with it. And they speak deceitfully, which means they already knew they had something in their mind. When they're about to make a deal with them, and they'll tell them what they can do to make it right. They'll tell them the dowry that they can pay, which isn't really a dowry, it's a deal. But he says, this is what you can do, but they know that they're doing this deceitfully. They know that this isn't actually the plan. And so by the way, for what they had proposed, what the people of Shechem had proposed, is completely against God's will, what God had called them to, what God had declared for them as a nation. Their way to resolve it is, let me marry her. We'll make a deal amongst ourselves where we can all be combined. We can marry your daughters, you can marry our daughters. We'll have all these things, and we'll make one nation. And God's like, no, that's not what I called you to. My people are called to be separate. You can't intermarry with these people, these people from Canaan, these pagan people. I called you to be separate from them. And they're proposing a deal for them to just all be united with these pagan idol-worshiping people. Verse 14, it says, and they said to them, this is the deal that the brothers are making, we cannot do this thing to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a reproach to us. Now, in part, that's true, right? The circumcision was a sign of them being separate. So they say, we can't let them be with someone who's uncircumcised. But he says, but on this condition we will consent to you, if you will become as we are, if every male of you is circumcised. That is a big commitment. Take all the adult males from this city, and say, all of you need to be circumcised so that I can marry this one girl. He really likes this girl. Like, I guess when the prince wants something, he's going to get it. So That's their deal, if you get circumcised. And then he says in verse 16, we will give our daughters to you, we'll take your daughters to us, and we will dwell with you, we'll become one people. Do they intend to become one people? No, that was against what God had called them to be. But they're bringing circumcision now into this deceit, which they've learned well from their father about deceiving people. And now the covenant of God is becoming part of their deceiving. And it says, but if you will not heed us and be circumcised, then we will take our daughter and be gone. And their words pleased Hamor and Shechem, Hamor's son. Verse 18 is a shocker to me, by the way. This pleased them? I mean, okay. That's, you're okay with this? Everyone's going to be circumcised? All right. This guy, I mean, he's committed. He really wants to marry this girl, and so he says, yeah, that sounds good. Let's do that. And so they're all going to be circumcised. And they're going to do something terrible. The brothers are going to do something terrible, but they're bringing the covenant of God into their deception. Like, they're just taking it to an all-time low. So you can see that these guys are in emotion and in the flesh and not in the spirit as they're making these decisions. Verse 19, it says, so the young man did not delay to do the thing because he delighted in Jacob's daughter. He was more honorable than all the household of his father. So he was honorable in a sense, but more honorable than all those of his father's household. I don't know if that's saying much because he also raped this girl. So more honorable. This is the group of people that you want to be united with? This is the people that you're going to make a deal with to be one nation together with? Yeah, maybe you better be careful. Maybe it's better if you're separate, right? This is the most honorable, the guy that went and raped this girl. Maybe you should be separate from these people. This isn't who we should look out to be the people that we're connected with. Verse 20, it says, and Hamor and Shechem, his son, came to the gate of their city and spoke to the men of their city, saying, these men are at peace with us. Well, they sold the lie well. Therefore, let them dwell in the land and trade in it, for indeed the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters as wives, and let us give them our daughters only on this condition. Will the men consent to dwell with us, to be one people, if every male among us is circumcised as they are circumcised? Will not their livestock and their property and every animal of theirs be ours? Only let us consent to them, and they will dwell with us. So they say, well, make this deal, but if we do this, then it's going to bless us, because not only can we intermarry with them, but also our livestock will be theirs. And they see the blessing of Jacob, how blessed he is, and they say, yeah, this will be good for us. Let's do this, and we can all gain. So the prince is selling it on the people by saying, we'll all get financial gain from this, so let's just make this deal. I mean, you got to really want to be, into the money here if you're willing to do that. So they did it, and it says, all who went out of the gate of the city heeded Hamor and Shechem, his son, and every male was circumcised, and all who went out of the gate of the city. So they all go to the gate of the city. They make this deal. The gate is where the decisions will be made, and they all go out there and they get circumcised. They're in this thing. They're committed. They follow through, thinking that they're going to be one with these people. But it says in verse 25, now it came to pass on the third day when they were in pain, that two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took his sword and came boldly upon the city and killed all the males. So this is the problem. Instead of dealing with it in a just and a sensible way, when it was one person that had harmed one person and you can deal with it, and let's take that one person and let's give him justice and let him deal with the consequences of his wrong. Instead, nothing was done, and then it creates this vacuum, it creates this void and this need for something, and then it gives space to vengeance to come in, and then that causes chaos to where now these guys who are supposed to represent God, they're supposed to represent forgiveness, they're supposed to represent love, they're supposed to represent the character of God. They've gone in and they've wiped out all the men in the city. Now, should there have been justice? Absolutely. But is this justice? No. This is not justice at all. This is vengeance. They take out every male from the city. They kill them all. So this is totally a work of the flesh. Because it wasn't dealt with the right way, then it gets dealt with the wrong way. So we have to understand that we saw in chapter 3 this great need for forgiveness. But we also see in chapter 34 that forgiveness doesn't mean no justice. Justice is essential so that things are dealt with the right way and not the wrong way, right? And so we can have, the heart of God is both of those things. The heart of God is that there would be justice, but also that there would be forgiveness, right? And so I think that as a society, we have to stand up for righteousness, for morality, for justice, and we have to hope, we have to vote, we have to look for justice to be done in society. But we also, when someone hurts you personally, you also have to have forgiveness because God has forgiven you. And so there's a balance between both. Verse 26, he says, and they killed Hamor and Shechem, his son, with the edge of the sword, and took Dinah from Shechem's house and went out. So they go in, they kill all the guys, they take the sister, and they leave. And then it says in verse 27, then the sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the city because their sister had been defiled. So not only are they killing all the males, they're now plundering the city, taking all the things that they can take. And it says they took their sheep, verse 28, their oxen, their donkeys, what was in the city and what was in the field. And verse 29, all their wealth, all their little ones, and their wives they took captive, and they plundered even all that was in the houses. This got out of control. This is no longer representing God. This is not the heart of God. And this is a total fleshly, vengeance-fueled attack on the city. This does not represent God at all. But I think the brothers absolutely have part to play in this. I think Shechem has a part to play in this. The prince who started this whole thing off, he has responsibility in it. And Jacob also has responsibility for not taking it to justice at the beginning and dealing with it the right way. So there's a lot of things that go wrong. A terrible chapter, a chaotic story, and a horrible killing and taking advantage of people, lying, manipulating, murder, all these things that are in the story. And this coming off of chapter 32, where Jacob had this experience with God. It's so heartbreaking to see what happens when we give room to the flesh. Then verse 30, it says, Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, you have troubled me by making me obnoxious among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites and the Perizzites. And since I am few in number, they will gather themselves together against me and kill me. Let me just focus on something here. It says, Jacob said to them, he says, you have troubled me by making me obnoxious among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites and Perizzites. And since I am few in number, they will gather themselves together against me and kill me, and I shall be destroyed, and my household and I. Do you notice who he's focused on? What is he worried about? He's not caring for his daughter who was violated. He's not caring about his sons who are in this situation. He's not caring, he's not caring about justice or dealing with the situation. He's worried about himself. And that's the heart of the problem, is that he's selfish. And so the brothers say that in verse 31, but they said, should he treat our sister like a harlot? Should he? Absolutely not. Should he have had consequences? Yes. But should they have done what they did? Absolutely not. There was no balance, and this is what's dangerous, is when we don't have balance. When we're too extreme on one side or too extreme on the other, it's always a dangerous place to be. We need to have balance. But both of them were led by emotions. Jacob was led by the emotion of, I want to take care of myself. And the brothers were led by the emotion of, we want to get vengeance on revenge against what they have done to our sister. And nobody actually took it to what should be the responsible answer for what happened, right? It was all led by emotion. So as we look at the whole context of these two chapters, let me just give you 4 super quick, 2 minutes each, applications for these 2 chapters in their full context. The first one, we need forgiveness. When we forgive, it looks like Jesus. If you've been wronged and you're able to forgive somebody, people will see Jesus in you. Esau was wronged, but God blessed him and God took care of him, and he was able to let go of that, and he was able to forgive, and he was able to move on and see that God had given him what he needs anyways. He had enough, and he was able to let go of that. There was a time in his life where emotionally he wanted to kill his brother, but he had given that up, and he had been able to forgive and say, I'm moving past that. I'm not holding on to that. And when he did that, he looked like Jesus. Application number 2, justice comes from God. God is a just God. And when we seek justice, we're seeking the nature and the character of God. Justice is a good thing. Vengeance is not a good thing, right? Emotionally going and dealing with a problem in your flesh is not a good thing, but justice is a good thing. So we can't lose sight of that when we talk about these issues. When God dealt with our sin, he didn't just say, oh, no, I'll just have mercy on it. He dealt with it justly. He took it to the cross and he paid for it, right? And so there is justice together with mercy. But justice was brought because God is a just God and he has to have justice. The third thing that I think we need to notice here is that our reaction needs to not be feelings-based, but based on the character of God. We shouldn't respond in the flesh. If Esau had responded in the flesh when everything had gone down, he would have killed his brother. But he wasn't given that opportunity, and with time, God seemed to work in his life. Maybe even on the trip from Seir up to see his brother, God worked in his life to a place where he was happy to see his brother and he was able to forgive him. Sometimes that takes time. Don't react in emotions, but allow the Lord to give direction. It's important that we learn to wait on the Lord. And the last thing I think that's important for us in this section is don't base your Christian life, your spiritual life on mountaintop experiences. Jacob had an incredible experience with God in chapter 32. But coming off of that mountaintop experience where he had this great experience with God, he goes back down and he probably feels like, well, all right, God's for me, God's with me, everything's okay now. And then he lets his guard down and he goes back to who he was. We have to be careful. We want to abide in Jesus. That's the biblical command for us in the New Testament, is that we abide in him. That's where fruit is. We will have much fruit if we abide. But abide only happens in the present. Abide doesn't happen in one moment in your Christian life. You can have a great spiritual experience, but what will give us victory in the Christian life, what will allow us to bear fruit and to look like Jesus, is abiding in Jesus, continuing in Jesus. And so for us, we don't want to live from emotional experience to emotional experience. We want to abide in Jesus every day. And that's where we'll see fruit, and that's where we'll find balance, and that's where we'll find victory, not just one experience to the next. And we can see that Jacob obviously didn't do that. He has this great moment with God, and then he goes back to old Jacob, and there are severe consequences. An entire city is wiped out because he isn't doing his job, and he's back to old Jacob, and his sons are following his example to being manipulators and taking things into their own hands. So we have to be very careful. We want to be filled with the Spirit. We want to be abiding in Jesus. We don't want to give place to the flesh and give place to the enemy. So a lot of valuable lessons for us here. Terrible story. I think it's incredible how the Lord allows these things to be part of his story. This is the story of the patriarchs. This is the story of the people of God. And he allows this to be in here. It doesn't shine a good light on them, but he shows us the reality of what we have to be careful of. And God tells the truth about people. He doesn't try to cover it up. He doesn't try to hide it. He shows us it so it can be dealt with. And I think that's a good lesson. If God shows us these stories so that we can deal with it, I think that's the heart of God, right? That things need to be brought to the light and to be dealt with and not just covered up. So a lot for us to learn, and I pray that the Lord will do that teaching to us and be patient with us in the process, because we're not there and we need to grow. We need to have forgiveness, and we need to have spiritual responses instead of emotional responses, and we need to depend on the Lord. I know that I need to grow in all these areas. So let's finish with prayer and give these things to the Lord. Lord, may we grow, may we mature, may we abide in you and depend on the Spirit and not be emotionally driven or fleshly driven, but may we be filled with the Spirit. May we have balance and have spiritual responses to the things that are happening in our lives. And Lord, for all the times where we do have fleshly responses, we know that those fleshly responses bring consequences, as they did here. And we're aware of that. We take responsibility for our sin. But Lord, we also pray that you would forgive us and help us to change and not to continue in those patterns. Help us to grow, help us to change, help us to mature. Help us to look like Jesus. Lord, I thank you for that picture of Esau who looked like God. We thank you for your grace, that you're gracious to us, that your justice has been fulfilled in Jesus, so that now we can find grace and we can be forgiven. And we can come to you no matter how many times we failed, no matter how many times we've looked like Jacob. We can come to you and you forgive us. We thank you for that grace. May we have grace for others. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.